Start reading in verse 2, John chapter 8, verse 2. Early in the morning he came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and placing her in the midst, or in the middle of the courtyard, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now in the law Moses commanded us to stone such women. So what do you say?" This they said to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. And as they continued to ask, he stood up and said to them, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her." Once more he bent down and wrote on the ground, but when they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the older ones. And Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus stood up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, Lord." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on sin no more." Again Jesus spoke to them, saying, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." So the Pharisees said to him, "You are bearing witness about yourself. Your testimony is not true." Jesus answered, "Even if I do bear witness about myself, my testimony is true. For I know where I came from and where I am going, but you do not know where I come from or where I am going. You judge according to the flesh. I judge no one. Yet even if I do judge, my judgment is true. For it is not I alone who judge, but I and the Father who sent me. In your law it is written that the testimony of two people is true. I am the one who bears witness about myself, and the Father who sent me bears witness about me." They said to him, therefore, "Where is your Father?" Jesus answered, "You know neither me nor my Father. If you knew me, you would know my Father also." These words he spoke in the treasury as he taught in the temple, but no one arrested him because his hour had not yet come. Last week we looked at the account of John chapter 8 of a woman who was brought before Jesus by the Pharisees, who suspiciously was caught in the very act of adultery, all right, and dragged before Jesus to have Jesus answer a question about her. And we have set this scene all the way through our study of John. When you come to the context of John chapter 7 and John chapter 8, there were very, very powerful Jewish authorities, the Sanhedrin, their minions, who had been making plans ever since John chapter 5 verse 19, plotting to kill Jesus. And they have been, ever since a year and a half before the text of John chapter 8, they've been making plans and having a playbook over the last year and a half that they could use in order to trap Jesus and in order to ensnare him in something he would do or something he would say. So he could use his own words and actions against him in order to get him into trouble so that he would be arrested or even put to death. They tried in John chapter 5 to label Jesus as what? He healed a man on the Sabbath day, so they tried to label him as a lawbreaker or as a Sabbath breaker, and that didn't work. And Jesus, when he told the man to get up and walk, even though it was on the Sabbath day, they couldn't make the charge stick. They tried to secretly then draw up what was known as the arrest warrant in our language in John chapter 7 and arrest Jesus on temple grounds, bring him before the Sanhedrin to condemn him, but something happened within their plan that they were not expecting. They had everything in order. They had all the dominoes, and they were just waiting for all to fall. But what happened? Well, he was too smart, but there was a wrench in their cog that had to do with the temple guard. The temple guard was sent to arrest Jesus. They come back to the Sanhedrin and they say what? No one's ever spoken like this man. And they began to believe that Jesus was more than just a man and more than what the Sanhedrin was telling everyone. So their plans to trap and corner Jesus so far have failed. But all they do is turn to the next page and they go to the next play in their playbook. And early the next morning, Jesus was teaching in the temple amongst the scribes, or the scribes and the Pharisees come in to the temple courtyard in the midst of everyone, and they bring this woman before Jesus very publicly, very staged in front of everybody, and stood her in the middle of everyone and demanded that Jesus answer a question in front of everybody to entrap him or ensnare him. And they start out with this. In John chapter 8 and verse 5, they say, "In the law of Moses." Now, what does that tell you about where they're trying to trap Jesus? They're using what? Trying to use what against Jesus? The law. So they're trying to use the law against God, who wrote the law, who gave the law. He was the God of the law. But anyway, they say, in Moses' law, it commands us to stone such women. So what do you say? And the Bible tells us why they asked this question. Why did they ask the question? Two reasons. To test him or to catch him, and so...
They would have a reason
They have a valid reason or a charge they could bring against him. So if Jesus says, they try to catch him in a catch-22, all right? They try to do this where he's boxed into a corner and he can't say something without incriminating himself when it comes to the law. So they box him into a corner. If Jesus says, go ahead and stone her, then they could report Jesus to the Roman authorities because, you remember last week what happened? The Jews could not what? They couldn't kill anybody. You know this because Jesus was the one they were seeking to kill, but in John chapter 18, what did they say that they couldn't do? The Jews could not lawfully put anybody to death. They could not lawfully put Jesus to death. The Romans had to do it. The Romans had to sanction it. So if Jesus said, go ahead and stone her, then they could report Jesus to the Roman authorities and the Romans would take care of it. If Jesus said this woman is not guilty, what could they then do when it came to Jesus' response? Well, the law of Moses stated, what? Woman who is guilty of such should be stoned. Well, Jesus must not know the law, or he is a heretic who is teaching against the law. So they try to catch him into, or try to get him into a corner and box him up. Jesus brings in another scenario, and he uses the law against them. Because when he says, you who are without sin cast the first stone, he is going back to the language of Deuteronomy chapter 17 and verse 7. And he turns this whole thing back upon the people who are asking the question, what do you do with this woman? Should we stone her? The law of Moses says stone her. What do you do? What do you do? And Jesus says, you know that in the Old Testament law, the witnesses were the first one to throw the stones. So Jesus said, if you're going to stone this woman, the witnesses have to be the first one to stone him. So that brings Jesus out of the corner they're trying to box him into, out of the catch-22, and it takes everything and it shoves him right back into him. It takes every heavy part of this discussion and it overwhelms the people who are trying to trap him. So fail again. So I want you to remember that the Jewish authorities, the highest and most powerful people in the entire land of Israel, even the ruling and reigning body of the Jews, the Sanhedrin, want Jesus dead. And they're going through the playbook of traps, and they're going through all of their snares, and they're baiting everything, and everything they've thought about over the last year and a half, every scenario, and they want to kill Jesus. Their first two plans have failed, so they just turn the page to the next one. The next one is going to be a long period of incessant and constant harassment. Whenever Jesus is teaching, you will see the Pharisees or the scribes interrupt when Jesus is teaching, and they will do this all the way through up to the cross. So, before we move on from the account of the woman caught in adultery, there was a phrase we didn't go over last week too much that was a topic of discussion. The phrase was that Jesus says to the guilty woman, and I want you to know that Jesus never says that the woman is not guilty of sin. I want you to notice that. Jesus never says the woman is not guilty of sin, and Jesus never says she was free of the charge of adultery that is against her. Jesus does, however, command that she do what? There's a phrase. Go and sin no more. Chapter 8 and verse 11. This is not the first time that Jesus says this. He actually said this back whenever he healed the lame man who was lame for 38 years, who was laying at the pool. All right? Jesus looked at the man in John 5 and verse 14, the man that he has healed, right? And he tells the man, after he finds him in the temple, look, you are now well. You are now made whole. And he says a similar phrase to what he says to the woman who was caught in adultery. What does he say in John 5 and verse 14? There is a command, a negative command. I like hearing pages rustle. John 5 verse 14. I did give you the right verse, didn't I? Look, you are now well. You're made whole. What? What was that? Did I give you the right verse? Sin no more. Stop sinning. Or else what? Something worse may happen. Now, it is clear from what Jesus just said to this man who was made whole after being lame for 38 years that that man did something to cause his condition. Now, we don't know what was done. We don't know if it was a side effect of something when it came to some sin. We don't know if he drank himself into that. We don't know if his body was deteriorating or reacting to some sexual disease that he contracted from sleeping with various people. What we do know is that Jesus, when he found this man again, after he healed him from 38 years of not being able to walk, he says, stop sinning or something worse may happen. Jesus demanded a change of direction of this man's past choices and past life, and now he has a second chance. Second chance at life and movement that were not to go in the same direction that he came. They were not to go when it came to sin. Jesus uses much the same language speaking to the adulterous woman in John chapter 8. After he has said, where is everyone? Does anyone condemn you? And she says, no. He says, go and sin no more. Now, what sin is he talking about? This woman was caught in the very act of what? Adultery. She was guilty. She deserved the consequences of the law of Moses. And according to Leviticus chapter 20 verse 10, so did the man that she was with and that she did this with, who was questionably absent from the scene. She was guilty of defiling her life, but what Jesus demanded was that she not return to that lifestyle. What Jesus did was show mercy. It was a mercy. He saved this woman from the wolves who wanted to see her life, or at least her execution, as a bait and a trap to ensnare Jesus. But Jesus demanded something when it came to how he handled the situation. There was grace in what Jesus gave, but there was also truth in what Jesus spoke. And you can't have one without the other. You cannot have grace without truth. Let me say that again. You cannot have grace without truth. Paul speaks that famous phrase in Romans chapter 8 and verse 1, shall we continue what? It's up there, I think. Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? God forbid. How do we who are dead to sin live any longer in it? If Jesus forgave this woman, which we discussed last week, or if he simply rescued this woman from the teeth of the crowd and from the situation, the command was the same. Do not continue your sinful behavior. Do not continue to be a sexually immoral person. Do not continue to practice adultery. So forgiveness from Christ. When forgiveness comes from, or if this is rescue from Christ, we didn't know which one it was. All the text says is that neither do I condemn you. Whatever Jesus gave, whether it was rescue or whether it was forgiveness, does not excuse the sin that separated us from God. If we continue in that sin and choose that sin, what Jesus demands is that we understand we've been given the opportunity to start new and fresh. So the woman who was caught in the very act of adultery was not to return to the habit or the practice of sin that brought her before Jesus in the first place. She was not to continue to be unfaithful when it came to her own marriage. So I want you to see, and let that sink in, that the woman was caught in this sin. She was guilty of this sin. Had evidence brought against her out of 2 or 3 witnesses because of this sin. It was that she was caught in the very act of adultery. We cannot encounter Jesus without the direction of our previous life changing towards holiness. We do not live any longer in it. One of the evidences that someone is truly meeting Jesus is that they do not live the sinful life they previously lived. One of the things about encountering Jesus and following Jesus and truly changing is that you do not have the sinful practices of your life that was before. This woman was not to meet Jesus, agree with his words, be comforted by his words, so that she could go back to committing adultery after the conversation was over. This woman, as we all are, was a sinner. She was confronted and guilty of her sin. So the proper response to mercy received by the Savior for past sins is purity and holiness in the future. So Jesus told this woman and commanded this woman, leave your life of sin and abandon the sinful life she had before. Maybe this woman was like certain scenarios we see a lot these days, all right? And we see explanations like this all over the place. Of this woman really being in love with the man that she was committing adultery with, and they were meant to be together, and they're explained, that you're truly happy together, that God wants me to be happy, even if I found that happiness in sin. What did Jesus say? Go and sin no more. She had to choose between her past sinful life and behavior in Jesus. And it's an opportunity we're all given when it comes to our sin. When we meet the truth of Jesus and we come face to face with him, she's a sinner, no doubt about it. But she was also given the opportunity to choose to keep being and living that or become something totally different. To keep living in the condemnation of adultery or obey the words of Jesus like the lame man and stop sinning. It's very interesting. I was reading a commentary by Augustine on this. And he said, we find in ourselves a danger. And that really got my attention when he said that we find in ourselves a danger. Because he's writing about this passage. He says, the danger is in hope and despair. And I was like, what does that mean? He says, we can have a false optimism, a false hope that God is merciful to me, a sinner, so I can do as I please. He says, that's one end of it, all right? Or we can have a false despair, that there is no forgiveness for the sin that I've committed, so I should continue in it. So he says there are two different aspects of this that are very, very false, that we can fall into when it comes to our sin, just like this woman could fall into when it came to her sin. There's a false sense of optimism that Jesus has rescued me from my sin, so I can go back and do it again. I can just keep living that same life that brought me before him in the first place. That's the danger. On the other side is the danger of despair. That because you've committed a sin such as adultery, there is no way that God would ever forgive me. Both are wrong and dangerous. We know that there is no sin the Lord cannot and will not forgive. We know that Christ's death atones for every sin. And the only sin that will remain unforgiven is the one we hold on to. It's the one we refuse to repent and turn from. On the other hand, God demands that we walk with him in the light. And sin, as you know, cannot be in God's presence any more than darkness can exist when it's in the brightest light. So sin has to be cut off and thrown away, and we must take the command that Jesus has stated very, very seriously. Stop sinning, John 5 and verse 14. Or, as he says to the adulterous woman in John 8, go and sin no more. Because we can easily get caught up in those two extremes. That because we think that we have done something that is beyond saving, that we have something that is so deep when it comes to our despair, that there's no way that God will ever forgive it. Or we have this false sense of hope or false optimism, that because we have been forgiven of this, we can just go and do it more and more. Both are untrue, and both head our hearts towards destruction. It's interesting as we kind of transition after this, the way that this command is phrased. Go and sin no more. It is a command, but within this command from Jesus is a cease and desist order. Now use our language when it comes to that. Cease and desist, to put in our language. So Jesus commands the woman of John chapter 8, and he commands the man in John chapter 5 to cease the action that was seen in the past. To cease what was an activity before, so that it's no longer present in the future. Let me say that again. To cease from an action that had been started in the past. To stop the old habits and the old sins of life, and to make a clean break from the sins that we're previously living in, and the guiltiness that we feel. Once that happens, we choose, and God leads into righteousness. This woman was commanded to change her behavior of life, not to stay in her life. And Jesus was going to be there to bring her out of the pit of sin. It's the same with us. Jesus will give you his hand to pull you out of your sin and rescue you, but he will not go with you into a bed of adultery. Let me say it again. He will not go with you into a bed of adultery. We do that ourselves. He will not go with you into fornication. He will not go with you into a lie. He will not go with you into insert any sin here. Because once we choose that direction, we have walked out of the light into the darkness. So, I told you it's going to be like a hard shift. So I just wrote down discussion when it came to the class. So if you have any discussion about the adulterous woman or things like that, we're going to kind of shift gears here in a second and see some reactions to Jesus.
Well, but you said that guy, whoever he was, that said if you get forgiveness, then you feel like you can go ahead and keep on doing that.
Yep.
How many? I mean, I don't feel that way. I mean, I don't think anybody else in here feels that way.
Well, there's a lot of people in the world that do.
People that do that.
Yes.
So once they've been forgiven, oh, I can keep on doing that.
A lot of people.
But where would he come up with that at? I mean, just because people do that? I don't know.
Oh, this was Augustine. This was way back in like 3rd century. I mean, he wrote this a very, very long time ago.
Okay.
And if he wrote that a very, very long time ago, guess what's still around today? And it is more prevalent than ever. That I can get forgiveness for what I've done, and I can still go home and do the exact same thing and be fine. And Jesus said to the woman, no. Yes?
What about David? He kept Bathsheba.
He did. And he paid for it.
He had lots of problems with it.
Yep.
He kept
So. You smile, Don.
Comparing how people live in the Old Testament times, Old Covenant, and then trying to take our New Covenant rules and apply to that, it's kind of like comparing watermelons to strawberries. Because in the Old Covenant, they had a year-by-year sacrifice that erased all their sins. They were perfect. Hebrews 10:1 says they were made perfect.
Yeah.
Every year, the Jew, if they were faithful, moral, and not sinning like that, every year they were made perfect. Every year. That'd be great, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
You know what they did? They're made perfect. Then they go again another year. And so, and that's all in the New Covenant, Old Covenant, and that's tangled. But you can't take the rules and regulations of that and apply it to New Testament teachings Jesus taught. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's a lot of discussion about that, but
Mhm.
that's the point.
That's exactly what I've been thinking the whole time you've been talking, that Jesus is slowly introducing the new covenant to these people, a little at a time, and it's just blowing their minds.
Well, and you have to, in the context of this discussion, the law of Moses had been so perverted and skewed by the time we get to when Jesus came. I mean, they had so many laws they added to it that we've gone over before. That, I mean, the Pharisees, they said that when it came to tithing, they would not only give when it came to their money, but they would go in and they would do what with their spices? They would, get 1/10 of their cumin and all of their spices, and they would do all that. And they made that into a mandatory thing in order for you to be a Pharisee. And if you did not do that, then you were not a Pharisee. But that's not what the law was about. So, yes, I understand totally what you're saying of Jesus saying things that would totally blow their minds, which he did, especially like we talked about the temple guards. I mean, they came to arrest Jesus, and they said, no one's ever spoke like this before. And if you remember, a lot of the discussion Jesus has about things, you have heard it said where? In the old law. You've heard it stated in the old law. And then Jesus would say something else. It wasn't contradictory. It was what the law was actually based upon when it came to loving God and loving your neighbor as yourself. But those things had been so pushed to the side that it was only about either sacrifices or habitual rituals and things like that. It wasn't about loving God and loving your neighbor. It was only about the ritual of doing religious things. And as long as you did the ritual of religious things, then you were good. No matter if you were morally corrupt, which is why the Pharisees were like, hey, we're the greatest people on the planet when it comes to our faith. And Jesus says, no, you're a bunch of vipers and hypocrites. So yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. And I said he paid for it because you know what happened to the baby? Yeah, the baby died.
There was a lot of people that had more than one wife, and
Oh, yeah.
Jesus said that he overlooked that,
Yes.
but he didn't accept it.
I wish we had time to go into what that phrase, he winked at. You know, at the times that ignorance God winked at. I wish we had time to go into that. There's a lot more to that than just going, oh, he just kind of went, you know. God kind of winced a little bit whenever they started marrying. No, that's not what happened. I mean, it has to do with how hard people's hearts had gotten when it comes to their relationship with God, that they had no relationship with God. They only had a relationship with what they desired. And it goes back to Judges chapter, or the whole phrase in Judges when it comes to they only did what was right where? In their own eyes. So. Those are good questions, though.
I think the common thing I hear, when you try to teach people that aren't believers, they'll say, well, God loves us and he wants us to be happy. And I don't see that God telling anybody that. I mean, he tells us he loves us, but I don't think he says go do whatever makes you happy.
I would qualify that. God does love us, and he does want us to be happy. But there is a category in which those two things are to be fulfilled.
Right.
And our own desires do not cause those things, you know? So God wants us to be happy. He loves us, yes. But at the same time, the way that we fill in that blank of being happy is totally different than what God does.
It's kind of like us with being parents. We love our kids and we want them to be happy. That doesn't mean they can have candy for dinner or run out in front of a car or burn the house down.
This is true.
It's kind of the same situation. Sometimes you have to give tough love.
This is true.
What do you say to someone that is no longer a believer or struggles with their faith based on bad things that have happened to them in the past? Because when I read John 5:14, stop sinning or something worse may happen to you. Obviously, I don't believe that, you know, doing bad things is God punishing us. He may allow bad things to happen to us, but I actually have gotten that verse read to me as to why they don't really believe. They look at God as not a good God.
Mm.
And so I didn't really have the answer at the time, but
Well, in the context, I mean, it is alluding to something this man did in order for his condition to be that way. But as far as the suffering question, we could talk about that for a while. And as far as that being connected to unbelief, where I start with anything like that is trying to get the point at which the train went off the track. I know you can quote verses and things like that to people. I understand that, but there's a point in that person's life where the train derailed, and something happened or something clicked. And getting back to that point, and that's a starting point to launch from. Does that make sense? I'm not saying don't use the Bible when it comes to that. I'm just saying there's a point in which their faith was derailed by something.
But because something bad happens, or because we may not agree with God or understand God, does not take away his existence.
No.
So then his existence, I mean, he is all powerful, all knowing. So his will is what we need to be following.
Yes.
So whether you understand it or not, and like you said, he does want us to be at peace in our spirit, but with him. If people just listen to what the Bible said, even if they weren't believers, they would have a better life.
Well, definitely a better understanding of
Well,
life.
yeah.
Yes.
Well, Job is a good example. I mean, bad things happen to good people.
Yep. And like I said, it's in a discussion that is passing. It is very hard to cram like all of Job into a discussion, you know, or handle the gigantic topics of suffering and why God allows it, you know. But at the same time, and I'm going to discuss this more in a sermon later, but the I don't know how much I should give away, but you're gonna hear it anyway. The people that you are talking to, especially if you don't know them, don't trust you. I'll just say that. And the people who see you as coming from a different direction are starting to lean towards not trusting you because you don't see eye to eye with them. And one of the hardest things is to tell someone something that is true and know that they don't trust you. That is the truth. It has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with the world that we live in. Make sense? What do you do when you get a number on your phone that calls you that you have no idea who it is? You don't know who it is. It could be somebody calling and saying, you know, it could be your neighbor that moved in down the road and got your number from somebody else. You don't know, but what do you not do? You block them. Well, I wouldn't go that.
You just don't answer.
You don't answer. You block. Yeah. Don't even know anything about what the call's about or what the person is doing or what they're asking for. Just automatic distrust.
It's important to leave a message.
This got a voicemail. That's a good one. Can we just text? No, but it's true because if I'm having a conversation with somebody that goes into that deep territory, the distrust happens really quickly. Okay, it's just like if somebody comes in and you know asks me questions or for advice or things like that, and they don't know me very well. It is very hard for them to open up until they understand who I am and what I want to do. Does that make sense? I know that the Bible truth will never be disputed, and I understand that the only way that we're saved is through the gospel. At the same time, there is an issue with the trust that people have looking towards us, and also an element of distrust that we have of looking towards people that we don't know.
Well, there's a lot of preconceived biases
Yes,
before the conversation
yes.
starts.
And it is. It's like that unknown number on your phone. Most people don't want to answer it, and if they do, it's like, no. So. And all that has to do with a sermon on evangelism that I haven't written yet. But all of that concept is the same, that it is getting harder and harder to talk to people about anything because so many people distrust you before you ever speak. So. Anyway, that's totally different. Sorry, went on a tangent. Am I way off base in that? I need you to tell me because I'm going to write a sermon, but am I way off base about that? How many of you open emails from sources you don't know? Who has email anymore? Right? I do. I like my email. But seriously, I mean, if you had, for those of you who are older, okay, if you had an email from somebody that you don't know who it is and it has an attachment, what are you not going to do? You're not going to open it. What if you got a friend request from somebody with an attachment sent in the message and you don't know who it is? Are you going to open it and automatically? No, you're not. So there's a bunch of distrust, and we've been taught that in a good way when it comes to credit cards and information and not sharing that kind of stuff. But at the same time, it has overflowed into a lot of other things when it comes to relationships with people we don't know.
But it's a form of, you don't open it because it's protection. You're protecting yourself.
Yep.
By not opening it. And when you tell the truth, or somebody may tell us the truth, and you don't want to face it, you reject it. You're protecting what you already believe or what you already want to do.
Carmen? You said you, Carmen? Yeah.
I have a hard time with this. When you're doing evangelism, you really can't, you could, but you can't change them automatically. If they live 25 years in sin, you're going to preach children. No, you have them home for dinner with you. You get to
I agree. If you did not know what she just said, she said, I'm glad you agree because I'm right. So, Don, scold her when you get home.